This dramatized documentary is set in 2025 and grounded in known wildfire dynamics and Los Angeles history through 2024. The wind arrives like a verdict dry, invisible, absolute. It rattles through the canyons about an hour after midnight, a pressure difference screaming from the high deserts toward the sea, pulling at every leaf and eve in Los Angeles, like a thief testing locks. Palm crowns thrash. Eucalyptus leaves turn silver as they flip in the gusts. Window frames hum. A dog barks in Woodland Hills, then another in Altadena. On the ridgelines, where chaparral crouches in patient green, nothing moves. Then, somewhere you can't see, something small and ruthless takes a breath and glows. At a desk in the Oxnard forecast office, a meteorologist named Devin watches. The numbers turn carnivorous. The gradient tightens. The humidity crashes. The wind, telemetry spikes against the upper end of what the models dared whisper. Devin rubs his eyes and leans closer. The map is a skin prickled with red warning sign arterial network of risk. He has spent years in this room and has learned there are nights when the atmosphere refuses to be predicted, when it decides to bend the city toward it. This is one of those nights. In the San Fernando Valley, Captain Elena Morales rides with Task Force 88 through streets shivering with the first dust of ash. The radio is a staccato pulse unit, staging pre-positioned strike teams. Patrols rolling where the hills meet the foothills. It isn't one fire yet, not even a set of coordinates, just a crackle of possibility and a string of addresses that could become tragedies by morning. The Santa Anas don't just ignite landscapes, they ignite decisions. Which roads to close, which neighborhoods to knock awake, which doja line to cut before the fire tells you where it will go. An Alvarez family photo birthday candles in a kitchen in Sylmar Brace. On a refrigerator door as the wind slams the side of their duplex. Outside, their young son presses his face to the living room window and watches as the night turns grainy with dust. Points. Is that snow? It's ash, soft, gray, ancient as the soil itself, rising from somewhere beyond the ridge. Their mother lifts the phone from the table, thumbs hovering over the city's emergency alert thread, and then over a message to her neighbor you up. Devin watches a radar and sees not rain, but detritus smoke and dust, making their own weather. The first 911 call is a flare of data in the dispatch, then another, closer. A transformer bangs in the distance, with the dull, cannonade sound of a vault giving way. Streetlights flicker, then return. South of the 180, somewhere between a thicket of power easements and a line of goat-fenced hills, a smudge becomes a tongue of light. A patrol unit reports an orange glow. Then the words no one says lightly, beseebly, flame. LAFD's map of the city glows with sectors and staging areas. Captain Morales flips down the visor and reads the assignment. Fast attack along a brush-choked drainage above a cul-de-sac, where coyote trails funnel wind into a throat. She can't see the fire yet. She can smell it hot resin and dust, the faint sweetness of burning laurel. She radios their arrival. Sparks lift from the toe of the slope like a constellation. A night like this rearranges time, minutes elongate, distance folds. The canyon mouth moans and then shrieks, and the captain feels it in her teeth. An ember lands on a dry wreath, on a door to blocks down. It hisses, then, mercifully, dies. On a deck above, a plastic chair sails into the neighbor's yard, spins, and is claimed by the bushes. Across Los Angeles, the city holds its breath. Downtown towers blink as if startled. At the port, cranes stand still, cages of steel against a breath they cannot see. Every gust rewrites the rules. Devin picks up the phone and calls a battalion chief he knows by voice. These gusts are going to outrun the forecast, he says. We're seeing 70 plus on the canyons. From the northeast, at first, but watch for the shift coastal eddies. At sunrise could go chaotic. The chief grunts. They've both said such things before, saying it doesn't change anything except who is ready when it happens. The first engines crest a cul-de-sac as the hillside flashes with a curtain of flame. The fire isn't tall yet. It's low and fast. A tongue-licking, dry grasses, darting between the dark shapes of sage and chemise. The crew pulls lines, the hose heavy in their hands, and the first stream arcs into the emberlit dark. They knock down the forward edge and feel the wind try to take it back. The Alvarez family throws essentials into a duffel. They can hear a chopper somewhere, then remember it's far too windy to fly. A notification vibrates on the mother's phone. Red flag warning, extended through tomorrow afternoon. Be ready to evacuate. It uses the word ready like a promise. Devon scans for sparks along the freeways. The 101, like a tendon through the hills. The 405, the tether between valley and coast. The 180, a seam that separates hazard from home until it doesn't. In Topanga, a security camera catches a palm frond snapping like a whip. In Pasadena, a train of embers snakes down the arroyo, little stars tumbling over stone. In the Angeles, a glow that shouldn't be there grows into a person, then a house, then a neighborhood. Captain Morales watches the hillside. She thought they had outflanked erupt across a ravine. A gust is a command. The fire obeys. The crew tries to pivot, but the eucalypts behind them stutter with heat. They are used to choosing. Tonight offers no easy choices. She radios for a second alarm. Her voice sounds calm, even to herself. By the first hint of gray on the horizon, the fire has learned the lay of the land. It starts to exploit it. It sprints along a ridge line and then throws sparks downwind, sowing the ground. It finds a cedar fence and turns it into a fuse. It finds a stack of old lumber behind a garage and eats. It finds the breath in a dry wash and runs. On a bluff above Malibu, a violinist practicing soft arpeggios in the pre-dawn hears the wind knock a chair into the patio door. She stops and listens to a sound she has dreaded for years, a roar, with no engine, a kind of fabric tearing. She steps outside and sees the Santa Monica Mountains her horizon begin to ripple with orange. The captainess radio crackles with a report from a unit miles away. New start near Topanga Canyon. 30 seconds later, another near Chatsworth. The valley feels like a throat clearing. It's as if the night has coughed embers into every canyon at once. The long, glassy leash of the 405 shines beneath them, an indifferent river of headlights. Elena looks toward Mulholland and sees just for a moment the dark silhouette of the city S-edge in the sea beyond. Then the ridge to her west lights in a line, as if a fuse she didn't know was there has been burning all along. The flames race along it, meeting the wind, and in one sickening instant leap. Across a gap the size of a highway, lancing through the air in chains of sparks. The leap lands in the green belt, behind a row of homes, and blooms monstrously, a daisy chain of ignition points swelling into one convulsive silhouette. Sirens whip from every side street. The wind, gleeful and absolute, rakes at the edgers and finds purchase. The crew that was mopping up becomes the crew that is now defending structures. Hosies trace bright arcs against a sky that has turned the color of old pennies. Across the basin, a janitor at a studio lot in Studio City steps outside with a trash bag and watches as black flakes drift down like moths. His phone misses no beat this time. Emergency alert, evacuate now. The message floods thousands of screens. In a condo near Sepulveda, an elderly woman squints at her phone, sees the alert, and begins to make small piles of what she thinks matters. A photo album, a necklace, prescription bottles, a tea tin with letters. She moves with the steady, deliberate motion of someone who trusts ritual more than speed. Devon sees the radar signature of a pyrocumulus tower beginning to form over the western San Fernando Valley. Heat rises in a column, dragging air into the inferno. The winds near the surface, already ravenous, swirl as they are drawn and deflected by terrain. The forecast's office phones run hot with agency calls. New incident names appear, clipped and surreal. Mesa, Ridgeview, Canyon 1, Dry Lake. You can't name them fast enough tonight, someone mutters behind him. Captain Morales splits her crew. 2 members sprint to defend a home where fence boards are a ladder for flame. Another pair drags a line around a shed with gasoline cans stacked along its side. The shed's owner, bare feet on hot concrete, tries to haul the cans into his car, as if he can save everything dangerous by loading it into a trunk. Leave it, Elena says. Not unkind. He looks at her, stunned, and then, as if waking, drops the can and reaches for his wife's hand. On the 180, traffic slows to a crawl. A highway patrol unit eases a cruiser across lanes and begins the ugly ballet of somewhere to the south. The highway disappears into smoke. Headlights become beads on a string, each bead a life, a story, a choice made under pressure. A child in the back seat laughs at the absurdity of the dog's panting into his face. In the front seat, his father's knuckles glow white on the steering wheel. One problem becomes 5. The Topanga start finds a canyon veined with old fire breaks that look like invitation. The Chatsworth start finds a line of older houses with wood-shake roofs and the kind of ornamental landscaping that burns in layers. A weedy lot half a city away begins to smolder and then lifts. A tree limb slaps a light standard into a shower of sparks above Ventura Boulevard. The Santanas do not care how hard anyone trained. Devon watches a gust front crash down a canyon shoulder. He knows his particular trick: acceleration through constriction. The wind will double in that throat, maybe more. He types a note into the incident chat. Anticipate explosive run toward the Brentwood Ridge. A night operator at the dispatch center forwards it. Her voice crisp, riding over the bedlam in the background. No one absorbs everything. Everyone absorbs enough. In the Alvarez kitchen, the boy moves like a little shadow between the adults. He holds a baseball glove. Then, after a moment, puts it down and retrieves a drawing of a house under a blue sky and 3 stick figures beside it. He slides it into the duffel. The mother takes one last look at the stove she cleaned after dinner, at the bills she meant to pay in the morning, at a plant in the window that leans toward the light. She locks the door and whispers an apology to it. Captain Morales' radio eddies with fragments. Fire now visible at spotting 1 mile out. Need a tank of Wind's too strong. A firefighter she's known for years points past her shoulder. She turns and sees above a darker ridge, the unmistakable boil of a pirate tower, lit from within like a storm cloud filled with lanterns. It is beautiful, terrible, and it means the fire has found an engine that feeds itself. On a street in Brentwood, a dog walker looks up. The sky is a kaleidoscope of brown and copper. A neighbor sprays a garden hose in an optimistic arc over a hedge that has been dying all summer. A teenager climbs onto his parents' roof with a bucket, defiant. The wind takes the water before it can land. A police cruiser rolls by with bullhorn blaring, the words evaporating into the sound of air itself. The decision point creeps closer than anyone wants to admit. Which neighborhoods become lines of defense, and which become salvage? Captain Morales has made this calculus in training. But training doesn't smell like this, doesn't sound like this. The whisper of grasses turning to flame, the distant howl of someone letting the last moment become the next. She thinks about her own apartment 20 miles to the east, a tidy place over a cafe where the barista knows her order and the neighbor's cat has adopted her doormat. She wonders what she would carry to her car in 4 minutes. Devon's models catch a potential eddy off the coast. Watch the pass. He tells no one in particular, and everyone at once. Sepulveda is going to act like a wind tunnel. If it jumps the 405, he doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. At the edge of the Sepulveda Pass, the Getty Center rises like a marble ship above the dry sea of brush. It holds a fortress of art built to withstand catastrophe, with air systems to keep smoke out. Cisterns fed by its own water. But below it, neighborhoods are only neighborhoods, with their gardeners' piles and deck furniture and Christmas lights, left threading dry eaves. An ember storms across the freeway like a swarm of insects. It lands on something receptive, and the something does what it was made to do. It burns. The first structure fires report in West LA, then in the Palisades. Elena hears the addresses and feels her stomach clench. Water pressure drops as pumps lose power 1 neighborhood over. A hydrant fails. The wind flays at their turnout coats, turning them into flags. Someone, somewhere, yells it's in the palm crowns. And then the world becomes a series of explosions, as those thatched domes torch, raining fiery hair across the block. Traffic on T-405 comes to a halt where it curls along the hill. A man abandons his car because the heat through the window feels like an oven door opening. In a hospital a mile from the ridge, a nurse checks oxygen canisters and counts.com as a metronome. The patients she need to move if the fire queries their address. On the radio, A voice says, clear and flat. We have embers crossing the 405. Then, Emmers, AC Ross. The static shreds. The word, the city inhales. The wind, delighted at its own power, speeds up. Captain Morales turns her engine downhill, and as they crest a bend, Cécès Tembrite seeds, skipping the asphalt of the freeway, crossing one world into another. They land like punctuation marks in sentient after sentient of dry garden mulch. A bougainvillea woe catches. Dinner, Roganvillea. Wellia. Word. Laura. A ceramic pot fractures with a sharp report. A little cannon in a yard where someone left a hose snaked and useless. The fire runs house to house, not as a line, but as impressions. Fingerprints on everything that can carry heat. The variability is obscene. One home a blackened bowl by noon. The house next door untouched but for a new constellation of burn scars on a stucco wall. The first 10 minutes after the crossing define the next 10 hours. LAFD's command expands in a breath. Groups. Air operations grounded by wind, staging areas filling with engines, and then emptying as quickly. Elena finds herself at the hinge point of two responsibilities. Structure defense for a street of long, narrow lots cluttered with decades of ILLDO with that in the spring, and rescue for a senior complex where evacuation protocols are about to be stress-tested beyond their intent. She does what good officers do. She assigns, she triages, she trusts, then she moves. Devon's Doppler fills the monitor with a vortex signature along the ridge above Kenter Canyon, like a torn seam in the atmosphere. The pyrocumulus tower mushrooms, a self-made thunderhead dragging electrical potential through the column. He prays he is wrong. And then someone radios a sighting. We've got a vortex. Rotating column, advising all units. In the jitter of heat and dust, a fire whirl scribbles across a slope. A small cyclone of sparks that strafes a driveway and leaves it tattooed with little black moons. Smoke turns day to a misremembered dusk. It tastes metallic, like a coin on the tongue. It finds its way through every unsealed gap, through the breaths of those who forgot their N95s and those who gave theirs to someone older. The nurse at the hospital triages patients by weathering, who can withstand a short ride in an ambulance through a hell-colored morning. She ties a mask around a man who smiles at her, apologizing for being old, and she says, we're all just getting through a day. In Topanga, Mina stares at the house she renovated with her own hands over 9 summers. It was supposed to be a refuge, a place where lizards sunned on the warm deck, birds and coyotes sang like a choir around midnight. She notices, with clinical detachment, that the tinderbox protections she never got around to installing now feel less like neglect and more like confession. There is a space under a deck just wide enough for a tumbleweed to find home. It did. When she watches the first lick of flame curl under the boards, she doesn't scream. She reaches for the camera on the table, an old habit she trusts more than Prurin Press's record. Captain Morales stands under a tree that sounds like surf because of the heat in its crown. A wall across from her is already radiating at a temperature that begs the paint to peel. She can feel the wind pressing against her chest. Her crew's eyes are big behind sooty masks. She points. That one, and that one. Don't get heroic. We get 'em out. We defend what we can. We live to fight it when that wind gives an inch. Her hand is steady as she draws a line on the map with her finger that is not a line on the ground. The radio bursts, new emergencies, with each breath. Trapped behind the gymnasium. Smoke conditions. Elderly, male, oxy, needs lift assist. Propane tanks. venting behind a structure. Audible release. Elena's own body becomes a system to manage hydration, core temperature, focus. She swallows the taste of Penny, which is fear made metallic. A resident thrusts a cat carrier into her arms and says the exact same thing she has heard in a dozen disasters. I know you're busy, but please in Tivoli. The Alvarez family joins an exodus that looks like a film about the end of something everyone thought would last. On the radio, a voice in Spanish explains what zones must leave now. The boy in the back seat hugs the duffel. The mother drives with her jaw clenched in a way that feels ancestral. Her phone chirps with neighborhood group texts. Is anyone with the Ramos twins? We left water on the porch. Bring chargers. If you can, the city, for all its edges, is good at the sat. Remembering it is a net that holds, Devon scans for the moment air operations can attempt a run. Super scoopers from across the county turn circles on a runway. Their pilots strapped in, hands fed as they wait for a green light. Helicopters tremble on their skids, rotors turning like commas in a breath that does not end. But below, the wind makes its own demands, flipping car doors, toppling a tent encampment beside the river channel, shearing smoke into fingers that grope for the next block. Elena watches a drywall joint blister in a hallway, then pucker, then spit. Behind it, a small space-an attic turns incandescent. A hot breath, becoming a language she can read. She bangs the ceiling with a pike pole. The attic exhales flame like a dragon laid against old tuba. Her team opens the line, and steam confounds everything. Eyes, lungs, time. Someone coughs and can't stop. She puts a hand on their back. They keep moving. Mina's camera captures the moment her garden becomes choreography. Embers spin across the stone path, each one a tiny dancer beyond her command. The lens fogs, then clears, then fogs. A neighbor screams for her to go. One more shot, she says. A joke she would have made even if the sky were blue. Then the tarp goes, then the deck chair, then the workbench she bought at a garage sale. And she understands that what burns is not just wood and cloth, but ours the shape of years. On a city block far from the ridge, a palm ignites, dropping burning fronds onto a sedan that had the misfortune of parking beneath Romont. The sedan's alarm wails, petulant and absurd. A sprinkler system sputters to life and loses pressure. An old man stands in a doorway, daring the fire to come closer like he is meeting a bully after school. He steps back only when his granddaughter tugs him by the shirt. The skies build their own dramatic logic. The pyrocumulus threatens to collapse, and with it might come down drafts that push flame in strange directions. Devon has seen this once before. He types a warning. He doesn't know where it'll be read in time, or by whom, but he sends it like a paper boat on a torrent. Trusting someone will catch it, Elena kneels beside a woman in a stairwell whose hands shake so hard she seems to be clapping to a beat only she can hear. We're going to stand up, Elena says, and the woman says I can't, which they both know is not true. They climb the last 6 steps together, while behind them the stairwell goes from warm to hot to sure. Outside, the light is a bruise. Her crew lies about which units are unseen because lies, when small and hopeful, can be tools. The woman breathes in giant, greedy gulps as if air itself is rationed. A sound cleaves the noise, a prolonged pained horn the kind a train makes, except there is no track. It takes a moment to place it. It's a ship out in the bay, bleeding into a fog of smoke that has settled over the water. The city hears it and feels briefly, irrationally, less alone. Mina turns at the exact moment her house crosses into a different tense. It was something she owned. It is something burning. The roof caves not in a dramatic roar, but in a long sigh. She keeps recording until the heat writes itself onto her skin in a way that demands she choose life. She runs, camera against her sternum, lens cap slapping her ribs. Just when the wind hints at easing, it eddies. It backs into streets 2 miles beyond where anyone thought it would reach by lunchtime. Elena listens to a call for help near a campus medical center, a ward full of veterans who cannot be moved quickly, and her chest tightens in a way that has nothing to do with smoke. She points her engine toward the cross streets that spell out a familiar pattern on a map she has loved since she was 14 and decided cities could be understood. Traffic stalls again. Not for heat this time, but for the choreography of bureaucracy, closures layered over closures. The freeway is a parking lot made of people who wish they had left 10 minutes earlier. The city, so good at motion, is helpless when told to wait. The hills above it glimmer like a theater, frame by frame. Each frame a yard, becoming a fuse, becoming a whisper of black. The nurse at the hospital checks her list again and hears a colleague say, "We need to go now." And then a rumor becomes a report. A new start east. A place that almost never burns like this. A sliver of parched parkland above a tangle of old neighborhoods and Art Deco apartments where parrots illegally introduced years ago scream from trees. A place with a name so stitched into the city's history that saying it out loud feels like cursing. Elysian. Elena stops mid-sentence. Mid-stride, the word moves through the command nets like a shock. Downtown the heart, potential spread along ridge lines that overhang freeways that carry everything. Devon stares at the plot and realizes they are drifting toward something. The city-esque memory docent know how to absorb. He starts to type again, and in the space of a few keystrokes, the wind makes a decision of its own. It twists. For 2 hours, all the forecasts had warned of sustained northeast flow, and they got that. And then, without ceremony, the atmosphere shrugs and throws a shoulder. The gusts veer northerly, then northwest, in a handful of canyons. On paper, they look like arrows bending. On der Grund, they are gas pedals, stomped to the floor. Flame that was marching toward the west side pivots, tongues licking in the direction of the river, along the polygons of parks and rail lines that carve the map into a quilt. Elysian flares not as a single wall, but as a series of illuminated seams. Like old wounds reopening along a hillside that remembered the 1930s when baseballs were first chased there. Remembered the 1960s when people gathered in defiance in its shadows. Remembered that its trees grew from imported water and stubbornness. It sends embers into neighborhoods that are landscapes of memory written in neon signs, murals, and apartment balconies lined with rugs. The parrots go mad, incandescent, green against the gray. Captain Morales stares at the command board as a new branch is carved out to deal with the east side. There aren't enough divisions left to name what the fire has started to do. Resources are staged, then redeployed, then stripped bare at the promise of protecting the next 3 blocks. The calculus becomes brutal in a new way, because the density of what can burn multiplies by 10. There aren't long driveways and pools now. There are alleys and 3-story walk-ups. You can't cut a dozer line through a neighborhood without cutting lives. Devon hears the first pilot's voice over the operations channel. A hell-attack ship eyes a narrow corridor between gusts. "We can give you 2 minutes at the top of the hour," the pilot says. Breath and arrow. 2 minutes can be everything. 2 minutes can be a street kept versus a street written in charcoal. Ground crews mark targets with colored tape and desperation. When the helicopter swings over the ridge, the whole city seems to look up and will it buoyant. At lax, arrivals divert as smoke fingers across approach paths. The terminal fills with the strange quiet of hundreds of people watching the same news on different screens. A child asks why the sky looks dirty. No one answers. On the freeway below, trucks carrying bottled water and pallets of something that will tomorrow be part of someone's life sit stalled in a row, tailpipes chuffing like steamships. The economic muscle of the city, so abstract in charts and quarterly statements, is suddenly a line of vehicles stuck in place, counting cost in idle minutes. Mina, ash-streaked and wild-eyed, surrenders her camera to a friend and climbs into a neighbor's pickup because the word went out. That canyon below needs help getting horses out. Once you have lost yours, the only thing to do is save somebody else's. In a corral she doesn't know, she learns the technique to rope over the ears. The voice low and ridiculous, the body square but yielding. The horse's eye rolls wide. The animal bolts, then stops, then lets her guide. She doesn't cry. She doesn't have water to spare. At the VA campus, staff push wheelchairs with one hand and 4 poles with the other, navigating sidewalks filmed with ash. The nurse from the hospital meets him in a choreography that should be rehearsed, but isn't. Volunteers appear, as they do in every LA emergency. From nowhere and everywhere, people who know how to carry and people who learned this morning. Among them is a man who has layered 2 shirts because he heard that's smart, and a teenager holding a bag of charging cables like a talisman. Firefighters carved a fence along the lip of the river, Every intake coupler precious in a city suddenly thirsty. Under their boots, concrete channels, water that looks like metal under a copper sky. The river becomes a tool and a taunt. A line that could stop a ground fire but cannot argue with embers. Elena positions her people near a bridge whose undercarriage is a bird's nest of dry twigs. She looks up through the lattice work and imagines the moment those nests go. Then a drone camera hums overhead, and for a heartbeat she feels like the fire itself is watching. The utilities control rooms are full of numbers. Sections of grid go dark on purpose to keep wires from arcing into receptive air. Neighborhoods grin with half illumination. The pattern, random and cruel. Generators cough into life behind supermarkets and become the sound of refrigerated hope. A water treatment plant on the edge of a burn scar becomes the next unthinkable nightmare if the fire shifts. Engineers stare at a bank of screens and feel like they are playing chess with a grandmaster who doesn't make mistakes, only moves. The headlines that will be written tomorrow: billions at risk, city at standstill. Unprecedented feel obscene right now in the mouths of people who are just trying to prevent a wall of fire from becoming a wall of names. Elena meets a crew from a neighboring county at a corner by a taco truck that has now become a staging area. They share the kind of eye contact that conveys a dozen decisions and an oath. We hold here. Devon watches the clock crawl toward noon. A window. The models whisper a window. Winds often ease when the temperature peaks. The gradient can relax like a fist unclenching. If the crews hold for another hour, maybe two. The helicopters can gorge water from reservoirs that are tired of being metaphors. Lake Hollywood, Hanson Dam, little blue ovals on the map. He says it out loud, and the room answers like a choir that knows the song. We need that window. The helitack ship makes its run. It disappears into smoke and emerges like a dragon's silhouette with a belly full of water. It dips, angles, and drops an elegant, impossible gesture that waits a ridge where a naked flame had built a new address for itself. The water hisses into steam. The crew on the ridge cheers in a hoarse, grateful way. It is not a solution, only a pause. But sometimes a pause is a miracle. And just as the first pause is granted, the city flinches. The east side flare throws off a shelter spot fire in the parkland along the Zonja line. A name that lives in paperwork and water rights, and now, suddenly, is a corner where someone walks a small dog, and someone else reads a paperback on a bench. The dog pulls toward a smell it doesn't know, and the leash goes slack, as the owner realizes the bench is now a thing that could hurt them. Elena's team is called to a line above Echo Park Lake, the water reflecting a second sun in the sky that is made entirely of smoke. People have congregated in the only open space that feels like safety, and the park becomes a tableau. A woman sprinkling a blanket with her water bottle so her baby can lie without breathing dust. A man holding two succulents like he's carrying trophies rescued from his kitchen window. A jogger who looks lost without the path he had expected to run. Helicopters chop-stir the air and lay down a glittering curtain along the hillside. The rumor is that the wind will shift. Again. It is rumor enough to hold them in place. At the port, cranes freeze at odd angles, like praying mantises stopped mid. Containers stack into walls that conceal stories of products no one craves right now. Ships idle off the breakwater, half hidden in reclaimed sea fog. Workers stand at railings and watch the city's hills crawl with veins of light. Home. One asks another. Nor comes the answer, and they nod and touch the same fear. Devon receives a text from a friend he didn't realize had his number. Can you see our street? He looks, though he is neither supposed to nor capable of doing this for everyone. He zooms in on a map that measures wind and heat and nothing at all like grief. He thinks of the absurdity of the request and also of its softness. One person asking another, in a night that won't end, to point toward a truth. The clock ticks. The models whisper again. Window! The first super scoopers lift at last, feeding on a strip of ocean that looks like steel under a sky that looks like rust. They bank toward the city with their bellies full and their pilots balancing physics against the variable moods of wind. It is, for a brief tranche of minutes, possible to believe in strategy again. The new start in the Elysian pushes a finger toward the edge of the 110, a highway that on a normal day sings with horns and impatience. Today it is a migration route. The firefinger hesitates at concrete, throws seeds across, watches half of them die, and half of them catch on the dry thatch along a median. That is what the city feels like now. A series of coin flips. In the command trailer, a chief's hand hovers over a red marker, then presses down to harden a line on the map that says here. The wind slackens just a notch. Not a stop, a notch. Enough that the sound is less a shriek and more a breath. Elena lifts her head like an animal that has heard a predator step in dust. Now, she says, and a dozen decisions surge forward to meet the window like sprinters at a gun. The helicopters line up with the rhythm of a second language. Dozers cut their teeth into soil along Mulholland, where decades of reclamation have built a firebreak of fortune and geometry. Those lines find pressure. It is not a victory. It is the moment before the last sprint. And then, as if to mock their brief advantage, a sliver of dry grass along the LA River catches from an ember that drifted a mile too far. The flame hesitates, tastes, and then begins to crawl toward a cluster of tents where lives are lived at the edges of the city's compassion. A volunteer screams for help. Elena snaps her head toward the sound and then toward the hillside that has not stopped trying to crown. She has to choose. You always have to choose. The choice hangs for the length of a breath that tastes like pennies and ash. The sky above them vibrates with the descending wop-wop of two heavy helicopters finally cleared to lay steel on fire. Devon watches the tack of the wind and whispers at it, like a gambler kissing knuckles before the throw. The city stands in a posture that looks like prayer and is really the physics of anticipation. She orders a split. Half the crew for the riverbank, half to hold the line above the lake. It is a bet on the generosity of the window, and a bet on her people. They move like they have rehearsed this exact impossibility, because all training is rehearsal for a problem that will never present the same way twice. The river team sprints, hoses snaking like veins in their arms. The hillside team crouches into the wind's teeth and advances one step at a time into heat that flutters their eyelashes. The helicopters arrive in sequence, rotas carving order out of chaos. 1,000 gallons, then another 1,000, cascade into flame along the lip of a street that kept its Christmas lights up too long. The water shatters into steam against heat, then settles, a shock to combustion's confidence. The city not. The whole city. But enough of the city to Mata breathes. At the river, tender-footed men and women who know the fragility of canvas homes help the firefighters pull their tents back, stomp embers with shoes too thin for it, cough and laugh in the particular way people do when fear and relief arrive together. A man in a baseball cap pours a bottle of water into his palms and presses them to the face of a veteran's dog, who licks his fingers and shakes like a child just out of the ocean. The fire nips at the edge and thinks better of it. The river wins this hand. The wind loses an argument with the afternoon. The pressure gradient relaxes by degrees, by human breaths, by gears spun down one notch at a time. Devon watches the gusts drop 10, then 12, then 15 miles per hour. The way you watch a fever break at 3 in the morning and don't say it out loud until the sun has a say. He sends a note. Window widening. Crews capitalize. And they do. Ground teams surge into the seams that were inaccessible all morning. Dozers lay parallel lines on erodible dirt in the operators. Unsung knights in machines with hearts of diesel. Create boundaries that will become, later, the geometry of maps and claims. Hand crews, faces masked, and eyes like people who have seen what sagebrush becomes at 900 degrees. Walk flanks with tools that seem inadequate until they are not. A dozen little victories bloom like inverse. Ember's darkness reclaiming orange. In Brentwood, a street that thought it would be a line collapses in on itself and holds, the fire robbed of wind and robbed, just as importantly, of expectation. A man who had been spraying his pool with water like it meant something drops the hose and walks to his elderly neighbor, knocks, and hugs him in a way that makes them both wobble. In Topanga, Mina stands in a ragged half-circle with people who predict they have nothing, and a young woman with a clipboard writes names that will define the next 2 months of their lives. Mina says her address and feels it become a story, then a file, then a case. She closes her eyes and sees the roof's eye again. He is the lens cap, slap her chest in her sprint to the truck, and understands that she is two people now. The one who left, and the one who will come back to Ash with a mask and a shovel. The VA campus exhales. The last wheelchair rolls under a colonnade, where the light looks less like apocalypse and more like afternoon. The nurse sits on a curb and drinks from a paper cup and tastes ash and coffee like two honest things. She looks at her hands and finds lines of black that will take a week to scrub out. A volunteer offers a phone charger and she laughs for the first time since morning. The sound is small, but the body understands it as victory. Late light finds its way under the edge of the smoke. It turns the city the color of brass. In that light, everything looks more permanent than it is. Captain Morales sits on the tailboard of her engine while one of her firefighters changes out a torn glove, with hands that shake like a strummed guitar. They're quiet, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much. The radio is still talking. Of course, mop up here, flare there, keep an eye on Topanga leak. A friend who can't stop narrating. She feels the deep, tired settle in at first. Tastes like relief, and only later tastes like grief. By dusk, the red lines on the incident map become pink. Containment never a promise. Always a proportion creeps up from single digit to numbers that let a city allow itself to eat dinner. The fire will smolder for days in the deep beds of eucalyptus stuff and the hollow hearts of palm trunks. Crews will find smoke in weird corners and stomp it. Insurance adjusters will gather their clipboards and move through neighborhoods with a particular gate of people balancing business and sorrow. Accountants will reach for the word billions and find it both accurate and inadequate, because the counting of loss cannot be printed in black. What this day costs begins to be tallied in more human currencies. The Alvarez family texts photos from a school gym cots in rows, a paper sign in Spanish that says food and another that says showers. Their boy shows off the drawing he saved, now crinkled and smoky at the edges. His mother looks out the open door into a sunset that is both gorgeous and warmed by the wrong thing. A volunteer hands her a phone number for housing, an application for assistance, a list of clinics offering inhalers, a promise that feels as thin and strong as fishing line. Mina goes back the next morning with a mask and a borrowed shovel. A home is a contour, a topography of memory turned to mineral. The heat still comes off it in waves. In the ash, she finds the handle of a cast iron pan, the kind that lives forever, now warped but recognizable. She holds it in two hands like a dumbbell and starts to weep in that way. The body does when it realizes it survived and is allowed to feel it. A neighbor touches her wrist and says, "We'll build something. I don't know what yet, but something." Devon stands outside the forecast office for the first time in 36 hours and squints into air that is, finally, dampening. The marine layer nosed its way back and fog mixes with smoke and makes a new thing that is easier to breathe. He thinks about how the models were right and wrong, about the gust that refused to behave, about the eddy that undid a plan. He goes back inside and writes an internal note, because the job now is to learn this fire like a dialect so that they can someday hear the warning earlier. Captain Morales drives past blocks where melted taillights have made little red rivers down asphalt, and past blocks where someone as wetting rosebush looks fine. The randomness bothers her more than the scale. She knows it will be deployed as testimony in debates that started before she was born. Defensible space versus the memory of shade, the power grid versus human error, the WUI versus the city that pretended it didn't have one. She knows that someone will say unprecedented and someone else will say we told you, and both will, in their way, be telling the truth without touching the center of it. In the weeks that follow, the maps will fill with polygons of loss. Assistance will flow unevenly because it always does. The city will argue about undergrounding lines and brush clearance, and how much space a home should set between itself and the plant community that makes these hills what they are. New ordinances will be drafted. Insurers will redraw their appetites in boardrooms, lit a pale, expensive blue. People who can will rebuild with stucco and ignition-resistant roofs and gravel where there was once cypress. People who can not will move and carry the story like a scar only they can feel with their fingertips. The cost will be counted in market capitalizations, shaved in overtime hours logged in disaster funds diverted. It will also be counted in things that never make it into reports. The time a janitor spent sitting on a curb because he did. Tino if he still had a home to look on the face of a man who realized his neighbor loved him more than the paint on a fence, the way the parrots returned to a blackened tree and screamed from it as if to dare leaves to come back. On a Saturday 2 months later, rain comes. That is gentle and exactly what it needs to be. It runs through the ash, like a blessing and like a threat, because even healing can be dangerous when soil is raw and hills are uncloved. Mud flows where fire drew its maps. City crews stack sandbags like punctuation marks against homes that held. The nest works, the line passes bags, and grunts like everyone else. The shared rhythm as old as work. Fire will come back. The Santa Anas will take their breath and try again. That is the logic of this place. But so is this. The way a city that is always falling apart decides, over and over, to learn the names of its neighbors and stack their furniture on the lawn and pass a hose hand to hand and stand on a roof with a bucket. That is both ridiculous and holy. The Blindside this time was not just a forecast that underestimated a pressure gradient or a redundancy that didn't hold. It was the assumption, nourished in good years, that TCT's periphery was still its periphery. It isn't. The edge runs down the middle of the map now, through the places people imagined untouchable. The price of that lesson is written across these hills. Captain Morales returns to her apartment over the cafe. The barista has taped a note to her door that says "Coffee es on me" for a month. She laughs. Then, alone in the stairwell where the light is always too yellow, she lets her forehead touch the coolness of the wall and breathes until her ribs stop arguing with her. She knows the sound of the wind will wake her some nights, that she will read a weather observation like a poem with a bad ending. She also knows the shape of her crew's mouths when they stand at ease after something like this, the way a city's shoulders lower together when the worst is past. On the freeway, news signs blink a hatful of possibilities evacuation route. Next, exit closed. Thank you, firefighters. The boy in the Alvarez family tapes his save drawing to the wall of a new place. He adds flames licking at the edges. And then, with a crayon that was never meant to be used for weather, it draws rain, big blue drops falling onto orange, and a helicopter overhead with a smiley face on its nose. It is a fiction that saves something true, that in the worst days, there is still a way out. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.